All right, I'll start with a presentation of the speakers. Heather Brevard is joining us from Microsoft. If you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi there, everyone. My name is Heather Brevard, and I am a Digital and App Innovation Specialist here representing Microsoft. My primary role is to help healthcare customers specifically identify ways to modernize in the cloud and become more agile and innovative as organizations using the variety of cloud native services that we offer in Azure, as well as the stack of dev tools, including DevSecOps tools like GitHub and Azure DevOps to achieve their organizational goals. Nice to meet you all.
Thank you, Heather. We also have Robert Freeman from GitHub. Robert, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Definitely, yeah. My name is Robert Freeman. I'm the CTO for public sector here at GitHub. I spent the bulk of my career supporting mostly public sector entities, as well as some private sector entities within the DevOps space.
Thank you very much. All right, so we're going to begin today's roundtable discussion by first talking a little bit about Microsoft's view of what's happening and where they're going with Azure DevOps. So Heather, if you'd like to go ahead and kick that off, please.
Absolutely, and Ken, if you don't mind, I've got a little deck of my own to share for this beginning part here, so I'll pull that up. Someone could let me know when they see that. We can get started.
Can see it.
See it. Awesome. So, yeah, just a little background from myself, the Microsoft perspective about what's going on with GitHub. So as many of you may have heard, Microsoft acquired GitHub back in 2018 for the tune of about $7.5 billion. And I think for a lot of people in the community, especially the open source community, this was a bit of a surprise because a lot of folks saw Microsoft as sort of this old legacy technology company, very much into proprietary software, not exactly the bulwark of open source. But Microsoft really, since Satya Nadella, our new CEO, took over back in 2014, has really begun to become a major voice and a champion of open source, not only in our own development groups that we have, our own engineering groups, but also in the way that we approach the development community across our enterprise customers, as well as individual developers out there in the ecosystem. So really, when we thought about acquiring GitHub, a couple years back, really the main driver of that was because open source is such a key way to how we all develop software nowadays. Over 90% of enterprise applications are being developed with some component of open source today. And Microsoft has become, in recent years, a major contributor to a variety of open source projects, particularly around the Kubernetes community, Docker, et cetera. And so we wanted to meet a lot of our development community where they were at on GitHub. And so that was part of why we went about acquiring this strategic acquisition. Now, of course, this raised a pretty big question from a lot of folks in our various enterprises that we support, which is Microsoft already has a very well-established DevSecOps platform called Azure DevOps. What's the story with trying to maintain and own both of these platforms? Do we really expect Azure DevOps to stick around forever? Is Microsoft going to maintain both Azure DevOps and GitHub simultaneously over the next few years? How do we really begin to rationalize these two different products which seemingly compete with one another, both under the Microsoft umbrella? And we've got some clarity on this from our product leadership in about a year back, which was Azure DevOps is not going away anytime soon. We've got thousands of enterprises that are currently iterating on it today. We've been investing in it as a product for over 10, 15 years now. We have a variety of teams internally in Microsoft that are deeply embedded in Azure DevOps as it stands today. However, because of the strategic position of GitHub and the fact that we have over 75 million users, both in the enterprise space and the open source community, we want to make sure that GitHub is really the focal point of our DevSecOps strategy going forward. So all new innovations will be going to GitHub. A lot of the really cutting edge things that we're doing around the security space, around the way that we approach actions or having cloud-based development environments, all of that is going to GitHub. But we don't want to be in the business of pushing anyone out of the tools that they're already embedded with and love. So we have no plans to sunset Azure DevOps anytime soon. If you're on it and you love it, that's great. We're not trying to kick you out in the next year or so. However, do know that a lot of the latest and greatest is coming to GitHub. So if you want to be on the side of the roadmap that we have here at Microsoft, we highly encourage you to move to GitHub when it makes sense to for your organization. And of course, as we'll talk about a little bit later in the presentation, there's ways that you can leverage both the cutting edge goodness of GitHub along with various aspects of Azure DevOps that you know and love in an integrated, tightly coupled scenario that will work wonders for your organization. Also want folks to know that both Azure DevOps and GitHub are being built by a shared engineering team right now. So a lot of the folks that are still maintaining the experiences that you may be comfortable with in Azure DevOps, they're still working on the tool, and they're bringing a lot of the learnings that they have from developing Azure DevOps for so many years to the table as we begin thinking about how we want to reform some of these experiences on the GitHub platform. We are also moving a variety of engineering projects that are on Azure DevOps today over to the GitHub ecosystem. So many of our internal engineers that are comfortable using Azure DevOps and have been for many years are starting to migrate to leverage a lot of that goodness that's in GitHub that is not in Azure DevOps today. So to just sort of wrap up here before I turn it over to the GitHub and WinElect teams, I really want to make sure that as part of this conversation that we're having, we're focused on the three main areas that I think really makes GitHub a very compelling solution and makes it really powerful to use in conjunction with Azure DevOps or other types of work tracking tools that you may be using today. And those three main pillars are the open source community and the ability to collaborate with inner source. One thing that I think that GitHub has done extraordinarily well from the beginning is being developer focused and developer first in the way that they approach being able to submit and contribute code, the way that they're starting to look at CI/CD, really being able to take advantage of open source and inner sourcing on the really what was the original place for developers to come and contribute to open source is very powerful in GitHub. The second big area of innovation that I really want to focus on is how we handle security directly within our repositories. GitHub Advanced Security and the CodeQL technology that they have today is extremely important for helping make sure that we all avoid our organizations ending up on the front page of national news for some kind of breach that came out of code insecurity. So being able to take advantage of security and secret scanning, code scanning, all of that is extraordinarily important and a big area of focus for GitHub. And finally, we're really trying to redefine in GitHub the way that we approach automating workflows and CI/CD with very community-driven way of setting up various aspects of the CI/CD process, everything from deployment to infrastructure as code, code scanning and testing, all directly within GitHub Actions, which is the home that we've created for all types of DevSecOps automation as part of your application delivery workflow. So really excited about this. Just want you all to know that Microsoft is a huge proponent of GitHub. We have various account teams that are supporting all of our customers in the enterprise space. So we're always happy to help, and we love to partner with our folks over at GitHub, with our expansive partner ecosystem. Folks like the WinElect folks that are on the call today have been very instrumental in helping our customers across a variety of industries navigate what's best for your organization and how we can really help you deliver more innovative features faster, more efficiently, and more securely. So I think there's a lot of great speakers today, and please feel free to reach out if you have any questions about how your organization can take advantage of some of these great new ways of approaching software development. And that's all from me.
Thank you very much, Heather. All right, so now we're going to to turn to the GitHub side of the discussion. And Robert, if you wouldn't mind, could you walk us through a bit about things from your team's perspective, as well as what does that roadmap look like going forward?
Yeah, definitely. Here, let me share my screen. I get my mouse to work correctly today. Let's see. There we go. I guess if I had a Microsoft Surface mouse, it would work better instead of using an Apple touchpad. So. You should be seeing my screen.
We can see it.
All right. Well, let me back up. I'm in the middle of this presentation, so you get a quick preview of what it's going to look like. So again, there's one more time. I'm the CTO for public sector here at GitHub. We work super closely with Microsoft on all things, whether they are working directly with Azure DevOps customers, folks that are looking to deploy GitHub on Azure, or looking to use the GitHub tools on other cloud providers. But what we really see when we see effective organizations is this kind of holistic approach of GitHub plus Azure DevOps better together. So in case you guys aren't familiar with GitHub, I would imagine you wouldn't be on this call if you weren't, but in case you aren't, it is the world's largest developer platform. There's about 75 million developers, millions of public and private repositories, and really it is the world or the home of the world's open source code, with over 2.5 billion contributions every year, including from a lot of the logos in here, which you'll be familiar with. So Microsoft and GitHub better together. The story about Microsoft and DevOps, Microsoft DevOps, Azure DevOps, and GitHub is really told throughout the kind of the DevOps phases. And what you'll see is as we walk through these phases, there actually is a fair bit of overlap between the two, and a lot of times it goes, what item you choose to use is really driven by your circumstance. How far are you in this DevOps journey? Are you converting from an existing tool? Are you just getting started with DevOps? Are you an ADO user right now and you're looking at, okay, do I need to migrate over, and what does that migration look like? But when you start in DevOps, you very much start with the plan side, and this is probably the most interesting from a integration standpoint, because this is where we see, I would say, about 95% of the integrations between GitHub and ADO are on this plan side. So, you have a couple things working on the GitHub side. You have GitHub issues and GitHub discussions, which we'll kind of cover discussions in a little bit. If you're not familiar with, we have some continued development on that front. But really on this, it's often a no-brainer with Azure boards due to Azure boards more maturity. Microsoft has a very strong history of creating enterprise planning tools, and Azure boards, is the most recent iteration. And so when you start talking sprint planning, measuring capacity, and doing it at an enterprise scale, Azure boards really is the product to use. And so the most common integration we see is the direct integration of Azure boards directly with GitHub. So the ability to link Azure work items directly back to pull requests and issues within GitHub, and being able to do that simply by including a link within the comment. So just by using AD, standing of course for Azure boards, and then the board work item number directly, the pull request will will automatically include that work item within GitHub itself. And not only will it work, but if you include the word fixed, fixes, so if you type in fixes AB number 127, when that pull request gets approved and pushed out, it will also go back and close that issue within or that work item within Azure boards. Then we move into the develop space. Develop space is a new space for GitHub. Again, Microsoft has a long storied history within the develop space with Visual Studio, and most recently with the open source product VS Code. And GitHub is really the newest entry in this, and what we're doing is really intriguing, because what GitHub Codespaces is a kind of a developer VDI sitting in the cloud, built on VS Code, able to use your existing VS Code extensions, as well as enhancements to that space to now allow you to use your own custom or I should say custom, your own personal choice from a text editor or complete IDE. So being able to use your Vim or Eclipse or one of the various kind of PyStrong and some of these others that come in, able to integrate this directly with Codespaces and allow your testing and your debugging to all go on within the cloud and give you that, you might be using an older laptop with 2 cores, but being able to stand up a Codespace with 16, 24, 32 cores of performance, and in the future even tie it into directly into GPU if you're doing AI ML type workloads and training. Then we move into Collaborate. Collaborate is really the bread and butter, the historical bread and butter of GitHub. GitHub repos are the place where the world stores code. Obviously, Azure repos exist. You can use those and migrate between the two. But the vision that is Microsoft very much is moving toward the direction of using GitHub repos. GitHub Advanced Security was sort of alluded to earlier. GitHub Advanced Security is a security suite that allows you not only to identify some of the things that you've been doing within GitHub for the last couple of years, identifying security vulnerabilities and dependencies, but take it a step further and be able to do static code analysis, to do direct code scanning to identify patterns that create vulnerabilities. An example might be the SolariGate issue. When that came out, Microsoft was able to, over the course of just a couple of days, create GitHub Advanced Security scans that can be pushed out and run against your code base to figure out in your custom code if you potentially had variants of the SolariGate problem that were being suffered throughout the world, as well as being able to do secret scanning. So identify tokens and secrets that are embedded within your code. The easy ones are the Azure and AWS tokens, but to get more specific, to use custom token scanning to identify tokens that are specific to your organization or your project. Identify those and not only highlight them and let you know that they exist, but to take them out of circulation. So actually invalidate them against Azure and AWS and say, hey, look, these are no longer valid, as well as on previously web hooks to be able to identify them and block them from even being committed to your code base. So GitHub Mobile, recently released in the last 6 months to a year, allowed you to now do approvals, to work with discussions, to respond to issues directly from your phone. Now that we're working in this this very 24/7 world, this very mobile world, to now have a first party experience of GitHub on your phone for the first time has been great for many developers. So delivery is a place where we see a lot of choice. We see a lot of folks that have built Azure pipelines, so built CI/CD within the Azure DevOps space and have been using it for a couple of years now and are very happy with it. And for users like that, the encouragement there is to continue using that tool, especially for existing projects. And as as it makes sense to start to migrate over to GitHub Actions. So GitHub Actions is based on the same technology that Azure Pipelines was built on. It uses YAML files to drive the actual action itself. Very similar to pipelines. In fact, the semantics are relatively close, and so the mapping of those as you start to go from one to another, is pretty straightforward. So jumping from one to another is not a huge leap. And then finally, once you do that CI piece and you do those builds, where do you store the binaries, the container images, the packages? And from a package registry standpoint, GitHub Packages is kind of the new kid on the block as of about a year and a half ago. But GitHub Packages gives you a fully featured container registry, as well as packages for NPM, for NuGet, for your .NET developer, for Maven and Gradle. Now, most recently for your Ruby gems, and being able to store those compiled binaries directly with your code next to your CI and CD suite, so that when you run your CD job, you're able to push those directly into the wherever you're choosing to deploy that. If that's Kubernetes and you're going to AKS, if you're using Azure App Service, all these other pieces, and then being able to tie that directly with some of the monitoring pieces like Azure Monitor or other monitoring tools like Grafana or an Elastic Stack. You're able to very quickly push that information directly there. And that's where we see, like I said, across this DevOps phases, the direct integration with GitHub and Azure DevOps. And most of the time, the pieces we see are specifically on Azure boards, where we built direct integrations, which allow you to link via text pointers directly into those tools, and then as well as Azure pipelines. And in fact, not only can you continue using your existing Azure pipelines, you can even use GitHub Actions to trigger those Azure pipelines. And so that you're able to recognize the advantage of having GitHub Actions in place while you migrate over into GitHub Actions. So first, adopting GitHub. How do you move repositories? I'm going to cover. There was a number of questions kind of leading to this on migration. I have a slide I'll show toward the end that kind of speaks to kind of some of the tools we built. We obviously have professional services that come in and use a lot of our tools to help you migrate from any number of places, whether that that's legacy TFS, whether that is newer ADO, whether that's another Git-based repo like a GitLab or a Bitbucket. In fact, a lot of times those are the easiest pieces, right? If they're already Git-based, a lot of the easy stuff can be taken care of very quickly. So moving code itself, moving changes and pull requests, that's very simple to move forward. So again, keeping your boards and your builds in place, that's the natural movement for the better together deployment model, is to keep your, again, Azure boards functioning, continue to use those advances. We'll talk a little bit about roadmap and what GitHub is doing on the issues side of things to enhance that. But really, Azure boards is still the place to be. Not only can you do builds and integration within GitHub Actions, you can also do a lot of kind of non-build workflows. So whether that be approvals, whether that be assignments, so taking an issue or a tab work item that's coming from Azure DevOps and assigning those to specific teams, automating notifications, automatically tagging. All of those type of things can be done with GitHub Actions, as simple as even applying random emojis if you wanted to. GitHub Actions really is a full automation suite, and it's not just, hey, I want to automate the build and deploy. It's also a workflow tool. And then finally, the using GitHub package registry, as well as on the kind of the non-supported things. So your undefined packages, undefined files that you're storing. So those artifacts, Azure Artifacts is still there. It ties in directly with GitHub. You can use GitHub Actions to call and pull those artifacts and then deploy them via GitHub Actions as well. We'll send some of these slides out because I think this grid gives you a good idea of kind of the pieces and that exist within the two sets of tools. You'll notice the yellow highlights are really, these are the market leaders in the space. So if you're looking down there, you're going to use boards, and then you'll use discussions, repos, Codespaces, advanced security, packages, actions within the GitHub side, and then you on the DevOps side, TestNets really doesn't have a GitHub capability currently, so you're definitely going to use that. And then the dashboarding and reporting side on Azure is kind of bar none, one of the best tools in the industry, and you're able to use those, and that'll continue to be the case from a Microsoft perspective. So continue to use those, and then eventually using GitHub Insights, which is more code specific and less about your deployment. So we'll send that out there. I think there's a lot of detail. It answered a lot of the questions that I saw come up in the chat and leading into the session. So we'll make sure that this gets distributed. So product roadmap. So now we're going to jump into kind of what we're building from a GitHub perspective, the direction the product's going, the capabilities, the things we've announced, especially around GitHub Universe, which is our big trade show that just went on a couple months ago. And this should answer a lot of the kind of questions we had coming into the meeting. So this is a kind of where we're at from a GitHub Enterprise standpoint, which if you would have seen this slide, about probably 3-4 years ago, kind of pre or right about the acquisition time from Microsoft, you instead of the, let's see what we have 24 blocks here. Instead of these 24 blocks, you probably see about 4. So now you're seeing things, and some of the things we're going to kind of talk through, or the Codespaces piece with instant cloud hosted development, Copilot. If you guys have seen that, that's an AI pair programmer that's built into Codespaces that does a lot of the light work for you, actually providing suggestions for repetitive tasks on the coding side, and inserting those in. We're actually in the test groups that we're using those on our beta. On the Python side, over 30% of code is being written by the Copilot AI pair programmer within Codespaces. So really folks taking advantage of that and be able to run with it. Actions, packages, again, those were things that didn't exist prior to the integration, and now we've been able to take advantage of all the work Microsoft has done with ADO and take a lot of that and give it a GitHub spin. So what are our H2 priorities? So the things we're working on, they are CI/CD and automation, continuing to expand the capabilities within packages and actions, continuing to drive our bread and butter of collaboration and community, how we interact. And by how we interact, I mean, how developers interact with each other, how developers are interacting with program managers and SMEs and eventually the end users. And then finally, the security compliance, like how are we securing this code and making sure what we deploy is actually safe. And then that's obviously built on enterprise foundation. So building up the capability of the individual tool to make sure it's secure and fast. So on the security and compliance side, there's been a lot of focus over the last couple of years at GitHub on building tools to make open source software and closed source software much safer. And this is what we're looking at. So you can kind of ignore the ones with the ships; those are already out the door. I left those on there because there's some pieces I might want to highlight. I'm just going to touch on a couple, and then ideally we can review others in either the chat or offline. But the big things that you're going to see are secret scanning dry runs. So right now you can do secret scanning with user-defined patterns, but there's some risk involved, and I kind of build a regex that has runaway and starts going crazy all over the place. Instead, I can now dry run those in an isolated environment to test those out. CodeQL, that's our code scanning language. So being able to do code scanning with Ruby, so we're adding Ruby support. That's the most recent language. We also support Go, Python, C++, Java, JavaScript, and Swift is about to be beta. So you'll see that here pretty soon as well for you Microsoft or so you Apple developers. And then the other two pieces that I think are kind of cool are security overview. So the release of an actual kind of a window that shows you across all your orgs and all your projects and all your repos what security findings you have, where you have dependencies that are being highlighted as far as where you're getting secrets detected, where code scanning is detecting potential vulnerabilities, being able to see that in one spot and then make decisions based on that. And then finally, dependency review enforcement. Dependency review enforcement will allow you to, when these pull requests come through and you were looking to merge, to actually stop them based on dependency. So if they have, security violations that are related to dependencies that they're in there, preventing those updates from being pushed out and creating those security vulnerabilities. So again, these are the kind of the pieces that make up our advanced security capabilities. Code scanning, so that's static analysis of every single good push. It's powered by CodeQL, which feels very much kind of Java and SQL had a baby and created a security coding language. And that's actually even extensible to other scanning engines. So being able to use other scanning tools using our CodeQL language. Secret scanning I mentioned. Security overview I mentioned, but also the ability to do security related policies. So to apply controls requiring certain results from that code scanning, or if they violate those code scanning. All right, so then we look at enterprise foundation, the things that we build our tool off of. And the big things that we've really seen this year, one is the push of enterprise managed users, which allows you to use your actual auth system to manage your users yourself. So being able to set their roles and their permissions so that when you have users that come off out of your project or out of the company, your auth system will automatically notify GitHub, and GitHub will go ahead and remove those users or change their permissions. Audit log streaming, we're just now pushing out this last month, and that allows you to actually push all of your audit information directly out into your own logging system, and then be able to parse through that, or to use algorithms to detect issues. And then another thing we're really excited about is custom repository roles. So right now, when you're using GitHub, really you're limited to those kind of preset handful of roles. And there's about 5 of them now, but now being able to use different permissions to actually go in and to set up very custom rules for your end users. So I mentioned some of these. The reason I left these slides in so that you can go in and see specific details without having, the talk track here. So collaboration, this is where we jump into some of the things that I think are more exciting for folks that they're coming to see. We're going to jump past this. We'll jump into these slides. Discussions is new. That's now coming to server. It's coming to not only individual repos, but also orgs. So being able to have discussions across orgs. We're also now pushing out the capability to insert videos, not only in discussions, but also in issues. So when there's a bug, you can include a video recording, screen capture of steps that led to that bug to be able to increase the speed people can go ahead and resolve that. But this discussions capability really creates an open conversation around the project, around specific code bits, around new issues, and allows you to create a world where you can do real Q&A and discussion on future capabilities. This is super exciting. So GitHub Issues, as I mentioned, Azure Boards is a much more mature product, but GitHub Issues has continued to see significant amounts of investment on building a real developer-focused planning tool. And so if you've used projects or Kanban boards within GitHub in the past, you'll be pleasantly surprised to see we've now included things like a spreadsheet table view. You're seeing a preview of it right here, but also the ability to create custom fields, to rank, group by, filter, create save views, and also enhance what that board looks like. So the ability to add a specific field, to add individual sprint, to add capability or work effort information within these fields, and start to look at backlog and some of these other capabilities. Here's a screenshot of kind of what that potentially could look like. These are pretty standard. These are all delivered fields, but like again, you can hit the little there's a plus sign. You can go ahead and that plus sign and add any type of custom field. And then there's also, like I said, a new timeline view that allows you to see where that potentially would fit in with your with the month year, but also your release schedule. GitHub Mobile, like I said, continues to be updated and improved. This is something I spend a good portion of my day in. I've actually moved a lot of my interaction on GitHub to my mobile. And then Codespaces. Codespaces I mentioned a little earlier. This is very much driven to fix the kind of works on my machine issue, as well as provide some enhancements from a corporate security standpoint, allowing you to drive toward avoidance of data filtration by making sure that your code and your data actually stays within that code space, but also allowing developers really to work on any machine from any location and get the same work and feel. And this is all based on dev containers that are sitting in there lying and follow you around with that that consistent experience with your plugins already preloaded, and be able to stand those up in a matter of seconds. The other piece that we're really excited about is the release of our Codespaces CLI and API, which allows you to use easy command line access and then do direct integration with Vim and other editors. So moving it beyond just the web GUI we've used in the past. And when I mentioned before, that idea of speed, a lot of that is driven by what we do with Codespaces is build these pre-builds would allow us to start these Codespaces in a matter of seconds. So you're no longer waiting for a VM or a container to spin up. Instead, it's ready to go because it's standing by in a region that's close to you. So actions and packages, this automation piece, what is GitHub building in this space? Again, actions and packages are big CI/CD places. We went live with actions packages with Enterprise Server in 3.0, which was released a couple months ago now, almost 6 months ago. But that gave you an ability to do metrics and tracking. I mentioned Audit Log Streaming, as well as administrative controls by organization and by package type. But we have a number of enhancements on the packages side that are pretty exciting. Centrally managed workflows, how we enforce best practices, that is coming out with reusable workflows just now in beta, with the idea that you can build these templates to say, look, if you're doing Python development, these are the workflows we would expect you to use. We can lock them down. We can dictate as an organization or a project, where those approval steps are, which compiling tools you're using, which base images, if we're using containers, we're using, but then also being able to use actions from internal repos. We should see that hopefully before the end of the year, as well as next year, you'll see the ability to kind of limit self-hosted runners to specific workflows. So if you're using self-hosted runners for your actions, to be able to specify them for specific use cases. We're continuing to improve runners. We've added macOS 11. We've rolled out macOS 12 in a preview, and we're continuing to kind of build the capability around self-hosted runners. So being able to be neutral multi-cloud. So if you have workflows that need to run across, AWS and Azure and a number of other clouds, we're continuing to expand that and being able to build easier auto scaling if you're going to use ephemeral runners. So those runners that are just standing up and then being torn down when they're not in use, that capability is rolled out and it's now GA. GitHub packages. The kind of cool things that we're working on that front is, is making sure we are OCI compliant from an image spec standpoint with our container registry, as well as being able to support Helm chart directly within GitHub as part of that as well. I mentioned generic artifact storage. That's something we're working quickly on to address. Also enabling anonymous access. So being able to host individual images without having, while having an anonymous access from GitHub Enterprise Server is something we're pushing toward, and it's now GA on our enterprise cloud. So being able to go ahead and push that out so you can use that as your host for your images. Public realm. So I went over a ton of stuff. All of what I covered is in a GitHub repo. It's open to the public. There's links in these slides. When I send this out, you'll have them. You can also search GitHub public roadmap in Google or Bing, and it'll pop right up. But that'll actually show you where exactly these things, and as they move, right or left on the schedule, you'll see them shift. That's maintained real time, and you're able to sort by any number of tags. So whether you're looking at cloud because you're going to use our github.com, or if you're an enterprise user using enterprise server because you have an air wrap requirement or some other requirement, you're going to be able to go ahead and see that directly. I am going to close my screen so I can see the chat. And there's a ton of questions. I'll work on when I'm done speaking. I'll work on kind of going through some of these and responding where I can. But I think I have time to take a question or two. If someone wants to come off mute. Oh, looks like Heather's been answering a lot of the questions. That's good. I'll
jump in, Robert. I'll ask a question.
Perfect.
So, question: when the enhanced functionality comes out for issues, being able to add the custom fields and really give us the ability to put in sprints and things like that, is the reporting side or the query side going to be beefed up to be able to kind of pull all of that out at the same time?
Yeah, good question. So I'll answer it two ways. The first way is yes. So GitHub Insights, which is something that's kind of been a project within GitHub for a long time. At one point, it was going to be to give you kind of a look behind the curtain. Was originally going to be a paid product. So GitHub was going to charge for it, and it wasn't going to be overly inexpensive, actually. We've since had quite a big change of heart, which I've been really super excited about, and that is now going to be just wrapped in as part of the offering, and that'll include additional ability to do reporting within that space. Now, it's still, I would say, for the first year or so, it is not going to be as robust as what you're seeing within Azure Boards. I think Azure Boards will continue being the more complete product. There's some advantages to issues. It is more developer focused. It's really, really fast, and it's right there built into where your developer workflow is. I think you're going to see a lot of really development focused teams, smaller programs. They'll migrate over to it. I think when you look at very, very large organizations that have a lot of very formal program management structure in place, those folks are going to stay on Azure Boards, for probably a pretty good while. We are at the same time building tools to handle the migration from one to the other, and when we reach feature parity, those tools will be available. But that's a good example of where you're going to see where you're seeing that Azure tool continue to be very relevant, and kind of a good example of why Microsoft isn't going to surprise everyone next year and be like, hey, this is going away, because like I said, that's not the case.
Thank you.
I'll work my way through some of these questions on the side and respond as I can, and then I'll turn the mic back over toward you, Ken.
All right. Well, what we could do is if you want to go through some of those questions, I'll run through a little bit of that better together story, and then we can wrap everything up by bringing it back around and opening it up for questions. So I'm going to share my screen now. All right. Hopefully everyone can see it at this point. So I'm Ken Muse. I'm the VP of Professional Services with Atmosera and Wintellect. I'm also a 4-time Azure MVP and was one of the ALM DevOps Rangers. So to kind of recap what both Heather and Robert have said, it's important to know Azure DevOps is not going away. In fact, Microsoft is still actively committed to the product, and they're continuing to develop on it, adding new features. Not as many as they were, but you can see what features are being developed or improvements right on their website. In addition, GitHub is not going anywhere either. It is the go forward direction. And in support of that, Microsoft has unified the teams and is focused on expanding GitHub and rapidly adding lots of new features that really help to make it the go-to product, especially if you're just starting out or if your team is in the middle of a transition and trying to figure out the best path forward. So what does that really mean in terms of your ability to use the products? Essentially, that you can use Azure DevOps, GitHub, or the two products together. So starting with GitHub, if you're looking at needing to use the two products together, there are two must-have apps that really make this possible, and you can find them in the GitHub Marketplace. The first, the Azure Boards integration, which allows you to have a two-way dialogue between GitHub and Azure DevOps if you need support with the Azure Boards. And if you need to integrate the Azure pipelines in, well, the Marketplace has an extension to cover that as well. So what are some of the reasons you might want to use one or the other? If you're starting new, we always recommend start with GitHub. It's the go forward direction. It's got all the new features and functionality. It's continuing to grow and improve. And so it should really be the first consideration. If you're using one or the other product today and are trying to figure out what features does each have, that you might be able to take advantage of. In GitHub, it starts with projects. And some of the new projects functionality that was mentioned earlier, which allows you to begin organizing your issues and the work you're doing logically to allow teams to begin to work through new features, new product backlogs, implement functionality. This new feature is almost a complete reimagining of the way we do issue management. And if you want that, that's really only available in GitHub. And the new functionality gives you a way to immediately drill in to gain some insights by being able to see your burn up and burn downs. Another piece of functionality that really is unique to GitHub is the advanced security offering. If you want to make sure that your code is as secure as possible in a time when exploits are becoming more and more common, this tool looks at your source code and allows you to get ahead of the bugs rather than waiting to find everything at build time. You have support for dependency reviews, code scanning, and secret scanning. The dependency reviews really come through Dependabot, a fully automated solution that can look at your project, identify dependency chains, and identify security chain exploits. And by that, I mean, if there is a package your code depends on, JavaScript, jar file, .NET library, Dependabot can look at those dependencies, identify ones that have been compromised, and create a pull request to automatically fix it for you, as well as let you know in other cases where this upgrade was taken, what was the relative risk of it breaking code. So Dependabot makes it very, very easy for you to identify risks in your code in near real time and quickly apply the changes needed to eliminate the exploit. Another part of the overall advanced security is secret scanning. Far too often, we see developers may accidentally incorporate something into source control that exposes a secret, a credential. If you've ever worked with Git, it's really easy to understand the risk of this because once something's in source control, it's there. Everyone knows about it. Everyone can see it that can see that source control, which means you have an ability to be exploited. The ability to look for secrets automatically as part of scanning your code means we can take steps to avoid this and to catch it as soon as it happens, meaning we can then invalidate the key and replace it with a better practice for securely deploying that key. Another part of the advanced security model is CodeQL, an advanced code scanning engine that can identify really complex security exploits by examining your code in code. It looks to connect inputs to outputs to find paths that could lead to exploitation. You can customize this yourself or take advantage of community scripts that have been created specifically to avoid common issues that are seen in the field. In fact, several of the more recent and much more notable exploits that have occurred lately were published out to the repositories and made available to you as scripts for CodeQL, so you could identify some of these exploits proactively in your code as part of your build and release process. And again, these advanced security features only exist when you're using repositories stored in GitHub. Another advantage of the GitHub repositories is the ability to standardize the approach teams take, whether it is common layouts of the repository, common code, or common ways of managing and tracking features and issues. GitHub repository templates allow you to pull all that together, putting your best practices in a single location that can be shared within your organization. So I can define what it means to have a repository that is best practice, and any new project can start off with a pre-configured environment that can apply those best practices instantly. In addition, with the new issue and PR templates that can do a form-based input, it becomes really easy to create compelling ways to enter the data and to make it manageable so that we can quickly act on feature requests, execute checklists, make sure that bugs have been properly triaged and evaluated. And we can standardize that approach across our organization. GitHub also brings Codespaces to the table, which Robert spoke about this one. And if you haven't played with it, this is, in my opinion, one of the more game-changing features that GitHub offers. Codespaces allows you to treat your development environment as infrastructure as code, meaning I define what is a working development environment. And with a click of a button, I can deploy a complete working environment in the cloud or on my machine. So all of my extensions, all of the dependencies, including databases, NoSQL stores, web services. Beyond that, it even goes a step further and allows you to debug right into the systems. So whether I'm deploying locally or in the cloud, I can start debugging, connecting through a secure socket to a port that represents my live application that's being built, tested, and debugged completely in a virtual machine, isolated in the cloud. So Codespaces allows us to eliminate the "but it worked on my machine" issue. It allows us to get rid of some of the pain points in setting up brand new development environments so developers can be immediately productive. And with the press of a button, it makes it possible to spin up an entire live development environment in your browser and fully interact with it and debug. So definitely a game-changing feature set. And then if we're trying to understand how our team is working, what projects are getting the most activity, where are we putting our time? Organization Insights in GitHub provides us that snapshot of what's happening between our teams and in our organization. Are we interacting? Are we deploying rapidly? Are we getting stuck frequently? Are we seeing short-lived branches? Or are we trending back towards long-lived bulk updates? Being able to see these things at a glance mean that we can continue to improve our DevOps practices while we're live and working on new features, new functionality, and new projects. If you're coming from Azure DevOps, you may already be using the YAML pipelines. It may be worth knowing that the pipeline code base was forked, and the vNext version of that became Github Actions. Github Actions provides an entire platform for automating the build, testing, and release of code, carrying it all the way out into production environments. Whether it's a web application, a database, a logic app, a function, whether it's on Azure, AWS, or Google, Github Actions allows you to create that automated end-to-end lifecycle that makes sure that you're building, testing, and deploying every new release of your code. While very similar to pipelines, it is significantly more advanced in what it can do. It relies on open source tasks, meaning that you get visibility to what is the code executing in your environment. And with some recent updates, now you can secure common workflows entirely within your org. By being able to share workflows between teams and be able to share our actions with each other, we can now commonize how we do our build, test, and release process. One other part of GitHub Actions that I love to also mention, beyond just managing your code, GitHub Actions interacts with GitHub itself. So changes to your GitHub environment, new issues, permission changes. All of these things can be used as additional events for additional workflows. Meaning that if you're trying to automate more of your development practices, more of the processes, if you want to make sure that when an issue comes in, it gets immediately assigned to someone for triage, and that there's a consistent follow-up until it happens. All of this can be automated fully within GitHub between the features that are built in for the management of issues and projects, but also through Github Actions. Github Actions can also interact with external systems, meaning we can also push data into or react to data coming from other systems so that GitHub becomes the center of our DevOps world. And then again, highlighting the upcoming GitHub Copilot that's in beta, a tool that makes it easier for developers to build out common code using patterns that we use over and over again. GitHub has taken machine learning across the code bases to understand how do you write quality code for common types of functionality, making it quick and easy to build out new features and new applications with best practices. All of this is fully integrated end to end with support for API-based calls, webhooks, custom apps, custom actions. And so again, it's an integration platform. And when might we consider Azure DevOps? Well, that becomes a little different discussion because different products. If you're using dashboards today to create that holistic end-to-end view of what's happening in your development environments and production, well, dashboards gives us that ability, but today it's not available in GitHub. And so if you want to build a custom dashboard, integrate your own custom extensions into it, and have it all integrated seamlessly, then you may have a need to consider whether or not to use the DevOps dashboards. Another area that we commonly see people needing to use Azure DevOps is the boards and backlogs integration. This has been a long-standing set of features that Azure DevOps has had, really geared towards enterprises and the practices that guide them. As Robert mentioned, the new project functionality in GitHub really starts bringing a lot of this functionality to GitHub. And so very quickly, we expect that people will be able to take advantage of that purely from within GitHub. But if you're using customized work items, boards and backlogs today, then Azure DevOps still supports that, and it can still fully integrate with GitHub so you can have visibility to source code tracking and to your builds and releases, all integrated in a single place with two-way communication. Another recent update to Azure DevOps that teams have needed to organize this is plans. The ability to look across one or more of your teams and their sprints to see where features are going to be released and when they're going to be available. Again, GitHub does offer something very similar through projects, and you can see that in the fact that GitHub themselves publish a project roadmap showing the development, the features, the functionality over time when they will occur. But if you have complex teams in Azure DevOps today and need this level of visibility, being able to integrate natively to the work items that are in boards and backlogs, then you may still be needing to use plans. Another area where Azure DevOps is often used in collaboration with GitHub is through the release management. Being able to have that graphical environment with support for governance, so you can see what went out when, who approved it, and what quality control was applied automatically, either entering or leaving each of these environments. And that's because Azure DevOps has a full release management governance solution that includes the ability to have approvals for pre and post environment deployments, to be able to limit branches to being specific branches as the key to a deployment, restricting things to business hours, running dynamic code to check whether the code meets certain quality, including looking at work items to see, do I have new issues? Did I use required templates? Did I follow certain practices? Am I seeing performance issues? All of this is natively built into the release management solution present today in Azure DevOps. Now, a lot of this is in GitHub. We're starting to see more and more of it arriving, things like approvals, the support for environments. And over time, this functionality will surely make its way into the full platform. And so this will become less of a differentiator. But if you need some of this today, then Azure DevOps may be part of that support plan. And then if you're doing manual test plans, the Test Hub. Today, that is an Azure DevOps exclusive. We always recommend, wherever possible, try and move to automated build and release. But that isn't possible in all cases. There are times where you do need manual test plan support, and that is an Azure DevOps exclusive. And I haven't heard of any plans yet that really show where that's on GitHub's immediate or near-term roadmaps. And so if you need support for manual testing, for building up test cases, executing them, and having that browser integration so you can have a checklist as it guides you through the test, the test plans in Azure DevOps will support that. Similar to GitHub, all of this is fully extensible because the GitHub and Azure DevOps team, being a unified group, both have seen the value of making the platforms fully extensible and customizable. That way you can bring your secret sauce to the project. You can bring the tools that matter to you to the project. And most especially, you can combine Azure DevOps and GitHub, as well as any other DevOps tools you may be using today, under a single roof with a single pane of glass to give you that end-to-end visibility and management of your DevOps solutions. So I hope this helps you understand some of the options you have with that better together story and some of the use cases where you may need features in one or the other. You'll notice that one key to this overall story, the advanced functionality in repos, is unique to GitHub. So even if you're using Azure DevOps today, we highly recommend it's time to look at, can you take advantage of the enhanced repo support that GitHub and the GitHub Enterprise Cloud can bring to your teams, especially with the new advanced security functionality. So with that, I'm going to open it back up for questions, and then we'll wrap things up from there. If you have a question that we haven't gotten to, if you wouldn't mind, please use the raise hand functionality in Teams, and we'll go ahead and unmute you, and that way you can get your questions answered on this call.
As we wait on that, there's a handful of questions in the from the original questionnaire. I can kind of walk through those, but there was a question on migrating large repos to GitHub from TFS. I guess the same answer, whether that's TFS or one of the Git toolings. There is on GitHub's documentation website, we include a number of tools for migrating all your standard code repositories over to GitHub. So it's pretty straightforward. Those, depending on the source, will dictate what's coming over. They're all basically bringing the history and the changes of the code itself. But if you're looking for specifics around some of the other functionalities like GitLab issues, things like that, then you'd have to use specific tooling. There was a question on I showed you the timeline view, and we talked a little bit about GitHub Issues Next and whether that is included or whether there's some additional cost. That's just part of GitHub. There's no additional cost if you're using the free tier on GitHub. If you're doing open source projects, that's comes delivered. If you're instead a paid user, GitHub Enterprise includes GitHub Issues. Now, mind you, GitHub Issues is in beta, and so that will not be GA here for a couple more months. But even then, there'll be no additional cost. That's part of the delivered capability. There was a question in regards to integrations for ServiceNow. ServiceNow has built a number of GitHub Actions to work directly with ServiceNow app deployments and changes. So you can host your ServiceNow apps directly within GitHub and then use GitHub Actions to deploy those. They have a blog post about that on their site. If I have a chance, I'll toss them in these links into the chat. Can GitHub host web pages? GitHub is able to host both public and private web pages directly from GitHub. You can also host wikis. You obviously also do wikis from Azure as well. GitHub Actions versus Azure release pipelines for deploying to on-premise servers. You know, that's an interesting question. I will say this goes into sort of the future of Azure versus GitHub or Azure DevOps versus GitHub. What you will see from an investment standpoint from Microsoft with Azure DevOps is the vast majority of the time and dollars invested in Azure DevOps will be around increased Azure integration. So you'll see additional capabilities when they come out rolling into that type of thing in Azure pipelines versus GitHub, which is built to be, obviously we're owned by Microsoft. We have direct integrations with all of the Azure services, but we also have direct integrations with really every other cloud provider and OEM. So, you know, whether you're a big cloud provider like an Oracle or Amazon, or if you're an OEM such as, you know, ServiceNow that I just mentioned, or Elastic, or some of these others, you know, the whole idea of GitHub is to be very agnostic to the developer and to be able to use whatever tools you're used to using with GitHub continually. There was a question in regards to features that are in ADO but not in GitHub. We kind of covered a lot of that, I think, in the discussion between the various speakers. I would say that a lot of times what you see with GitHub, especially right now, versus Azure DevOps, is a different approach. So Actions is a good example. Actions was built off of, you know, as was mentioned by all of us, I think, was built off of the, you know, the original code of GitHub or of Azure pipelines. But one of the big things that we try to do to make it feel very GitHub is to build this idea of not just a marketplace, but really of a community around the actions. So the ability to build an action, to open source that, get feedback on that. You know, so I can go in and Microsoft builds the Azure global team builds an integration to AKS. I can go in and I can use that action. I can modify it for, you know, to provide either additional capability or to be more specific or need. I could also submit back a pull request to say, hey, look, this would be a more efficient way to do this. And then Microsoft, you know, we'll look at that and say, okay, well, does that make sense for the whole community to take that? So a lot of the things we are doing are around the idea of continuing to build this community of collaboration around code, whether that's regular code or that's code tied to CI/CD or some of the other collaboration tools we have. Visual Studio integration with GitHub and Azure DevOps. I can speak to obviously the Visual Studio integration with GitHub. It's very first party. It always has been. One of the really cool things about Codespaces that's been mentioned a couple times is you can work with Codespaces directly within Visual Studio. So while you are using the Visual Studio install sitting on your desktop and utilizing that, all of the actual code and testing interaction. So any additional things you're installing from a packages standpoint or plugin standpoint are actually existing within that Codespace container, right? Isolation. So there, you can build like that. You can also obviously build that with VS Code, as well as a number of other big industry-leading IDEs. So PyCharm comes to mind. Obviously, we have close relationships with all IDEs. There's plugins for basically every text editor you can think of.
Insurance. The two insurances you've got, the UHC, is it just medical?
Yes.
When to migrate from ADO to migrate from ADO to, so when you're migrating from ADO to GitHub, what are some of the licensing considerations? Yeah, that's a good question. So, GitHub is a different license. If you have Visual Studio Pro Enterprise, you actually get a license with that now. That changed about a year ago, I guess, was we added that. The other thing to keep in mind on that migration path is that GitHub now includes an ADO basic license. So if you buy GitHub Enterprise, but you're not ready to migrate off your existing ADO install, if you think maybe it's going to take you, a month, 6 months, a year, 2 years, whatever it might be, or you say, hey, I want to continue to use, boards, and maybe I'm using test plans because I set a bunch of manual test plans. That will be included, so you wouldn't have to carry both licenses. Like I said, so that piece is included with your GitHub Enterprise account. That was probably about a year or two ago that happened at the same time. I think that's all of the kind of question backlog, if no one else has any in the chat.
All right. If you've got any final questions, feel free to raise your hand or put them in the chat. You can also feel free to reach out to us at consulting@winelect.com following this presentation. We'll be glad to get your questions answered and to work with you to understand what it is you're trying to do and what's that best path forward. I've put a survey link into the chat. If you enjoyed today's session, please click that link and answer the survey. It helps make events like this possible and helps us to collectively find ways to improve the event so we can make it more valuable to each and every one of you. I've also put the survey link on screen. For those of you with mobile phones, there's a QR code. And for everyone who is able to answer the survey, we're glad to provide a free hour of DevOps consulting, as well as a discount on training to help you and your teams get started working with Azure DevOps and GitHub. Looks like we've got one more question here. Can we continue to use Azure pipelines, or do we have to use GitHub Actions?
Yeah, great question. Pipelines will continue to exist. You can keep using it. There's no sunset date out now. I wouldn't expect one anytime soon. You can continue to use that for years to come. And I think in certain instances, it makes sense to do that. If you have, an investment in that space and you've moved a lot of your code or doing a lot of your development using Github Actions, Azure DevOps pipelines, I would continue to do so. I would take a hard look at whether new projects should potentially be built using Github Actions. But yeah, there's nothing wrong with that set of tools. It's very powerful. It'll continue to be supported. So the follow-up question to that is the security tools in GitHub, can they be used in Azure pipelines? So yes and no. You can use an Azure pipeline. You'd have to have a GitHub Enterprise license. You can have an Azure pipeline call those CodeQL queries. If you already had the licenses and you were putting your code in GitHub, the easiest way and the cleanest way would just be go ahead and continue using GitHub. But a pipeline can call that, but it has to call it. It has to make the call to GitHub. GitHub runs it within the repo itself, so the code has to be within that GitHub repo, and then you can return the result and any of the findings or artifacts back to wherever you want to put them with Azure pipelines. So yes, you definitely can. I think you'd find it to be end up having a lot of moving forward, so a lot of back and forth, which you didn't probably need to. And there was another question I guess I didn't respond to. I saw earlier, I forgot about. What is the GitHub security tools? Will they ever come to Azure DevOps? And as of now, that's not on the roadmap. I don't expect it to. They're currently used by Microsoft and Microsoft's OneES engineering team. So the engineering team that builds all Microsoft projects, and they use them directly within GitHub.
I'll add one thing to what you just said. For cases like what was just described, when we say Azure DevOps and GitHub can be used really well together, pipelines is also one of those things. You can use one from Azure DevOps, its pipelines. You can use Github Actions, still working with both products together. You can mix and match between different repositories. And for cases like what was described here around advanced security, you can even use both together in the same project with a two-way interaction. So your pull requests, your checks can see the pipeline that ran in Azure DevOps, as well as the pipeline inside of GitHub. And so for cases like this one, it can be great that if you're trying to incorporate things like advanced security, the new functionality could also be incorporated directly in as a set of GitHub Actions without having to alter and adjust your existing pipelines. So lots of options here. All right, any other questions that we haven't gotten to? It looks like Jonathan Pope has a question.
Hey, Ken. Yes, this is somewhat following up on questions that were posted in the chat earlier about integrating GitHub with some various database solutions. What integrations are you guys seeing that are going to move towards maybe VS Code or Azure Data Studio? Particularly something akin to what was the link that you sent, the SQL Server data tools, that's kind of, I think if I'm not mistaken, is Visual Studio only right now for integrating things like views and stored procedures that exist in your database into a GitHub repository. Is any of that going to be moving to some of these other platforms?
So what we're seeing today, SSDT is, you're correct, a Visual Studio based tool. Though it is free, you can download it with the Visual Studio shell if you don't have a Visual Studio license. And that does give you that end-to-end database capability. At the same time, the new Data Studio is adding support for infrastructure as code for SQL Server there as well. Also using the same SQL effects packaging engine that powers SSDT. You'll notice that SQL Package recently ended up becoming a cross-platform tool. So all the underlying code has now been recreated in .NET Core to be cross-platform. And so I think we're going to, if I had to guess, we're going to see a bit of a trend over time that the other tools have the same support, the same features, even if it's slightly different, being pulled into them, because at the end of the day, the code is code. It's just straight SQL being compiled into packages and then deployed with SQL package. And so we are starting to see some of those GUIs starting to appear and some of those tools starting to improve. So I don't think Visual Studio will remain that only source if you want to have the integrated GUI experience, although it is a primary one right now. And because a lot of that is just straight SQL scripts, That means any text editor that can manage SQL can also be used to manage those projects, the SQL projects today, and deploy them, including using VS Code. So we are seeing that today a lot of our customers use either the built-in Visual Studio or the standalone to support SSDT. But over time, as the tooling matures, I think we'll see people going where it makes sense and into the products that make sense for them and the way their teams work, the technologies they use, what people are comfortable with. With other data platforms, Azure SQL Synapse, formerly the data warehouse, Databricks on any of the various platforms. Many of these other tools have a very similar approach starting to be built in either into the tools themselves, like Azure Data Factory and Databricks, or third parties are starting to look at GUIs for those. And so even beyond Azure SQL, I think you're going to see an overall trend of more and more both in browser and more general purpose tools being made available to developers, because more and more people are realizing that your data has a life cycle and it needs DevOps as well. So I hope that that kind of covers what you were hoping to hear.
Yeah,
Yes, thanks.
just to make a small extension on this is purely just a note because I like talking about Codespaces, but because Codespaces can use, it's based on VS Code, it can use all those extensions. There are a handful of extensions like the MS SQL extension that provides some of like a subset of those capabilities. And obviously all those tools work directly with GitHub to store the code. But yeah, as far as code you're using, that's the only kind of connection with GitHub is being able to use a Visual Studio Code and the extensions which cover some of the and they'll continue to cover more, but some of the capabilities of Azure Data Studio.
All right. Well, I don't see any. Oh, there is one more question from Glenn Little. I have VS Enterprise, but don't see any options to activate or set up GitHub Enterprise. Is there no self-service setup path?
There's not currently. There is. That is in the works. Like I said, we was added. So GitHub Enterprise was added to the bundle or the offering fairly recently, and there's still, even though we've been, we were acquired quite a number of years ago, there is still some like billing and licensing things to tackle. So yeah, unfortunately, you do have to go to the support team. It's not a big pain. They're not going to try to sell you anything else. You just go through it. They'll give you a license if you're going to run it on prem, or create the account for you, or link your account to an enterprise code if that's necessary. So it's annoying, but unfortunately necessary.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Well, with that, we don't have any more questions and we're at time. So I'd like to thank everyone for attending today. I'd especially like to thank our special guests, Heather Brevard and Robert Freeman, for all of their time, their ability to answer these questions, and their insights into what's happening. Again, please fill out the survey. We would definitely all appreciate it. And feel free to reach out. We're glad to discuss these challenges with you one-on-one and see how we can all help you. Thanks again for attending, and we'll see you again on the next virtual event.
Thank you.